So our next topic is solving radical equations. Okay, so we're going to take equations that have square roots in them somewhere and we're going to solve them. Okay, and basically this is what our steps are going to be. Step number one is we're going to square both sides. Okay, because we've talked about how squaring and square rooting are inverses, they're opposites, right? So just like how you have an equation where it's x plus something and you need to get the x by itself, you subtract, right? Well, if it's x squared, then you take a square root. And if it's the square root of x, then you square. Okay? So if we had an equation that said x plus 2 equals 5, right, we would subtract on both sides because those are opposites. Okay? If we had something that said x divided by 3, right, then we would multiply by 3 on both sides because these guys are opposites, right? Well, when you have the square root of x equals something, you have to square both sides because these guys are opposites. Okay? So that's all we're doing when we talk about solving a radical equation. So we're going to square both sides. Whatever's left, you might need to do a little bit of solving on, but it shouldn't be anything too hard. And then the last thing that you need to do is you have to check your solution, okay? Because there's this special thing called an extraneous solution, okay? And what basically happens is that, like, when you first learned about solving equations and your teachers told you to check your answers, they wanted you to check your answers to see if you'd done something wrong in the process, okay? That's not what we're doing. Now we're assuming that you did the process right, but sometimes as you solve an equation, you can accidentally create an extra answer that shouldn't have been there in the first place. Okay, and you'll see what I mean as we kind of go through these examples. All right, so let's take a look at this first one. So this one, we're starting out pretty simple. Okay, we need to solve this equation. So I've got a square root of x. Well, the inverse operation of taking a square root is squaring. So I'm going to square both sides, and these guys cancel each other out. So then I'm left with just an x on this side, and over here, 6 squared is 36. Okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to check our answer. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my original equation. I'm going to plug in this number and just make sure it works. So the square root of 36, I want to know, is that equal to 6? So you kind of put a little question mark above the equal sign to show that you're checking. Okay, and is the square root of 36 6? Yeah, it is. So we're good. So that didn't take long. No big deal. All right, second one. I've got something square rooted, so I'm going to take my inverse operation. I'm going to square both sides. And the square root and the squaring cancel each other out. So I'm going to be left with the x, and I'm going to be left with the 3. And on this side, 4 times 4 is 16. All right, now we don't have, on this one, we don't have it set up so that x is by itself yet, so I'm going to have to just solve this equation. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 3 so that these guys will cancel. So I'm left with just an x over here. And then on this side, 16 times 3 is 48. All right, great. So now let's go ahead and check our answer. Okay, so I want to know the square root of 48 over 3. I want to know, does that equal 4? Well, 48 divided by 3 is 16. So does the square root of 16 equal 4? Yeah, that's true. The square root of 16 is 4. Okay, so we're good. All right, let's try our next one. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to square both sides. Squaring and square rooting cancel each other out, so those cancel. And I'm left with just x plus 3. Negative 2 squared, so negative 2 times negative 2. A negative times a negative gives you a positive, right? So that's going to be positive 4. Okay, and then I'll subtract 3 from both sides to cancel these out, and x equals 1. Okay, let's check it. All right, so I'm going to get the square root of 1 plus 3. We want to know, does that equal negative 2? Well, that's going to be the square root of 4. Does that equal negative 2? No, actually it doesn't, right? The square root of 4 is 2. It's not negative 2, it's just 2. So we've run into a problem here, right? That's not actually true. So even though we did all of this math right, this is all correct. We did all the steps right. Okay, the problem that we ran into is that when we actually try to solve this, it's not actually a true solution. So what you would say for this one, because we checked it and it did not work, is we'd say that this one has no solution. There's no solution to this problem because the only one we got when we solved doesn't actually make the equation true. Okay, so it's called an extraneous solution. That's the fancy word for it. Okay, an extraneous solution, it's when you solve it, something about the solving process makes an extra answer appear that shouldn't have been there. Okay, so this one would have no solution. The big things that you want to watch out for are going to be negative numbers. Okay, if you ever end up with a negative number inside of a square root or a square root that equals a negative number, that's going to be your cue. You might want to write that down somewhere on here. Okay, so the two things you need to watch out for, if you end up with a negative number inside of your radical, like if that had been a negative 4, or if you have a radical equals a negative number, that's what happened in this case. Okay, so you might want to write that down somewhere. That would be helpful for you to know. All right, last problem here. You can pause the video if you need a second to finish writing that. Okay, so this guy, I'm going to start by squaring both sides because squaring and square rooting cancel each other out. That leaves me with 4x equals, and then 6 squared. 6 times 6 is 36. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So I get x equals 9. And let's check it. So I want to know square root of 4 times 9, does that equal 6? Well, 4 times 9 is 36. And is the square root of 36 6? Yeah, it is. So we're all set. So that is indeed our answer. X equals 9. All right, and there we go. So solving a radical equation is not all that much more difficult than solving a regular equation. You just have to remember to make sure you square both sides as your first step.